The Stone Age represents the longest chapter in human history, spanning approximately 3.4 million years. This immense period began with the first use of stone tools by early hominins and concluded around 3300 BC when humans began working with bronze. To put this time frame in perspective, the Stone Age accounts for roughly 9% of human technological history. Everything that came after, from the pyramids of Egypt to modern skyscrapers, from the Roman Empire to the Digital Age, fits into that remaining 1%. The term Stone Age refers to the period when stone was the primary material used for toolmaking. During these millions of years, early humans and their ancestors relied almost entirely on stones, bones, wood, and other natural materials to create the implements they needed for survival. Metal was unknown. Writing did not exist. Cities had not been conceived. Yet this era saw some of the most profound developments in human evolution and culture. Archaeologists and anthropologists divide the Stone Age into 3 major periods, each characterized by distinct technological advances and social developments. The Paleolithic Period, or Old Stone Age, stretched from approximately 3.4 million years ago to around 10,000 BCE. The Mesolithic Period, or Middle Stone Age, served as a transitional phase from roughly 10,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE. Though these dates vary significantly by region, the Neolithic Period, or New Stone Age, began around 10,000 BCE in some areas and lasted until the advent of metalworking, which occurred at different times across the globe. These divisions are not merely arbitrary classifications imposed by modern scholars. They represent genuine technological and social revolutions that fundamentally altered how humans lived, what they ate, where they dwelled, and how they organized their societies. Each transition brought new challenges and opportunities that shaped human development in profound ways. Understanding the Stone Age requires us to think in timescales that challenge human intuition. 1,000 years seems like ancient history to us, yet the Stone Age contains thousands upon thousands of such millennia. Entire human species rose and fell during this time. Continents were populated. Ice ages came and went multiple times, reshaping landscapes and forcing human adaptation. Languages, though unrecorded, must have developed and diversified countless times over. The Stone Age began in Africa, the birthplace of humanity. There, in the East African Rift Valley, the earliest stone tools appeared. These first implements were simple, crude by later standards, but they represented a cognitive leap that would define the human lineage. The ability to see a rock not just as a rock, but as a potential tool, to envision what it could become with modification, and to possess the manual dexterity and intelligence to shape it accordingly, marked a turning point in evolution. From Africa, Stone Age cultures spread across the globe as human populations migrated. They reached Asia and Europe hundreds of thousands of years ago. They crossed into Australia perhaps 65,000 years ago. They entered the Americas sometime before 15,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. Each new environment presented unique challenges, and Stone Age peoples adapted their technologies and lifestyles accordingly. Arctic peoples developed specialized tools for hunting seals and surviving in frozen landscapes. Coastal populations created fish hooks and boats. Desert dwellers learned to find and conserve water. The Stone Age was not a uniform period of unchanging primitiveness. Innovation occurred constantly, though at a pace that seems glacial compared to modern technological change. A particularly effective tool design might spread across hundreds or thousands of miles over many generations. Techniques improved gradually, knowledge accumulated. Each generation learned from the previous one and occasionally added new insights or methods. Despite the name Stone Age, stone was not the only material used. Wood certainly played a crucial role, though it rarely survives in the archaeological record. Bones, antler and ivory were shaped into tools, weapons and art objects. Leather and plant fibers were woven and worked. Fire was controlled and used, but stone remained the most important material because of its durability and the sharp edges that could be created. Through careful flaking and shaping, the people of the Stone Age were not less intelligent than modern humans. Their brains, particularly in the later Stone Age, were essentially identical to ours in size and capability. They loved, formed family guerrillas, cared for their children and elderly, grieved their dead, and likely possessed rich spiritual and cultural lives. They told stories, though these stories are now lost to time. They almost certainly had music, language, humour and art. They faced challenges that would overwhelm most modern people. surviving in environments without the cushion of technology we take for granted. The Paleolithic period represents by far the longest span of the Stone Age, encompassing millions of years of human prehistory. Beginning approximately 3.4 million years ago with the earliest known stone tools and lasting until around 10,000 BCE, the Paleolithic witnessed the emergence of multiple human species, the development of increasingly sophisticated stone technology, the control of fire, the creation of art, and the spread of humanity across most of the Earth's land masses. Archaeologists further subdivide the Paleolithic into three phases. The Lower Paleolithic lasted from about 3.4 million years ago until roughly 300,000 years ago. The Middle Paleolithic ran from approximately 300,000 years ago to about 30,000 years ago. The Upper Paleolithic covered the final stretch from around 50,000 years ago to 10,000 BCE. These dates overlap somewhat and vary by region, reflecting the fact that technological development did not occur simultaneously everywhere. The Lower Paleolithic began with the very first stone tools created by early hominins in East Africa. These toolmakers were not modern humans but earlier members of the human family tree. Homo habilis, whose name means handyman, appeared around 2.4 million years ago in Africa. Standing roughly 4 feet tall with brains about half the size of modern humans, Homo habilis made simple stone tools by striking one rock against another to create sharp flakes. These flakes could cut meat, scrape hides, and process plant materials with far greater efficiency than teeth and fingernails alone. The tools created by Homo habilis are called Olduvai tools, named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, where they were first discovered in large numbers. An Olduvai tool typically consists of a core stone from which flakes have been removed and the sharp flakes themselves. Both the core and the flakes served as implements. While simple in appearance, creating even these basic tools requires understanding of stone properties, manual dexterity, and forward planning. The toolmaker must select appropriate stones, strike them at the correct angle with proper force, and recognize when a useful edge has been achieved. Around 1.8 million years ago, a new human species appeared. Homo erectus, meaning upright man, stood fully upright like modern humans, reached heights of 5 to 6 feet, and possessed brains significantly larger than those of Homo habilis, though still smaller than modern human brains. Homo erectus developed more advanced stone tools, particularly the hand axe. This implement, shaped on both sides to create a symmetrical teardrop or oval form with a sharp edge around most of its perimeter, required much more skill and planning to create than Olduvai tools. Hand axes are associated with the Acheulean tool industry, named after Saint-Acheule in France. Hand axes dominated Lower Paleolithic tool technology for over 1 million years, an almost incomprehensible span of technological stasis from a modern perspective. Yet these tools were remarkably effective. A well-made hand axe could butcher large animals, dig roots, chop wood, and serve countless other purposes. The fact that Homo erectus carried this tool tradition across Africa into Europe and throughout Asia demonstrates both its utility and the capacity of these early humans to transmit cultural knowledge across generations and vast distances. Homo erectus achieved another revolutionary breakthrough that would transform human existence: the control of fire. Evidence for controlled use of fire dates back approximately 1 million years, possibly even earlier. The earliest definitive hearths, showing clear signs of repeated controlled burning, appear around 400,000 years ago at sites in Europe and the Middle East. The significance of fire cannot be overstated. Fire provided warmth, extending human habitation into colder climates. Fire offered protection from predators, as most animals fear flames. Fire enabled cooking, which made many foods more digestible and nutritious, killed parasites and bacteria, and expanded the possible human diet. Cooked foods require less energy to digest, meaning more calories could fuel the energy-intensive human brain. Some anthropologists argue that cooking was essential for the development of large human brains. Fire also created a social focal point. A hearth became a gathering place where groups could sit together after dark, strengthening social bonds. Some researchers speculate that sitting around fires in the evening may have encouraged the development of more complex language, as people shared stories, planned future activities, and taught skills to younger generations. Fire extended the useful day beyond sunset, providing light for activities and conversation. The Middle Paleolithic saw the appearance of new human species and more sophisticated technologies. Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, emerged around 400,000 years ago in Europe and Western Asia. Neanderthals were powerfully built, well adapted to cold climates, with brains as large or larger than those of modern humans. They created Mousterian tools, named after the Les Moustiers site in France. These implements showed sophisticated flaking techniques, with careful preparation of stone cores to produce multiple useful flakes of predetermined shapes and sizes. Neanderthals were far more advanced than early popular depictions suggested. They buried their dead, sometimes with grave goods, suggesting belief in an afterlife or at least ritual behaviour. They cared for injured and elderly group members, as evidenced by skeletons showing healed injuries that would have been debilitating, requiring others to provide food and protection during recovery. They used fire routinely. They likely had language, though the sophistication of Neanderthal language remains debated. They created some form of body decoration and possibly art, though less prolifically than later modern humans. Anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago. For many thousands of years, Homo sapiens remained in Africa, gradually developing the full suite of modern human behaviours. Then, beginning around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began migrating out of Africa in what is often called the Great Migration. These modern humans spread rapidly once they left Africa. They reached the Middle East by 60,000 years ago, Australia by at least 50,000 years ago, Europe by 45,000 years ago, and the Americas by at least 15,000 years ago, possibly earlier. As they spread, they encountered other human species, including Neanderthals in Europe and Denisovans in Asia. Interbreeding occurred, as evidenced by the fact that modern humans of non-African descent carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA, and some populations carry Denisovan DNA. However, by about 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens remained as the sole surviving human species, while Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other human relatives had disappeared. The Upper Paleolithic represents the final and most dynamic phase of the Paleolithic period. This era saw an explosion of innovation in tool technology, the widespread creation of art, more complex social organisation, and the development of trade networks spanning hundreds of miles. Upper Paleolithic tools showed remarkable sophistication and specialisation. Stone blades, long and thin with parallel sides and extremely sharp edges, were produced in quantity. These blades could be hafted onto wooden or bone handles to create composite tools like spears and knives. Bone, antler, and ivory became important materials for toolmaking during the Upper Paleolithic. These organic materials could be carved, ground, and polished into fishhooks, needles, harpoons, spear points, and decorative objects. Needles with eyes allowed the creation of fitted clothing crucial for survival in Ice Age Europe and Northern Asia. Atlatls, or spear throwers, extended the range and power of thrown spears significantly, improving hunting success. Upper Paleolithic peoples lived as hunter-gatherers, moving through landscapes in seasonal patterns that followed game migrations and the ripening of plant foods. Group sizes probably ranged from around 20 to 50 individuals most of the time, though larger gatherings likely occurred when resources were abundant. These groups would have been organised around family relationships, with extensive kinship networks connecting multiple bands across a region. Hunting was central to Upper Paleolithic life, particularly in colder regions where plant foods were less available. Large game animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, bison, reindeer, and horses provided enormous amounts of meat, fat, hide, bone, and ivory. Successful hunting of such large, dangerous animals required cooperation, planning, specialised tools, and likely sophisticated communication. Archaeological sites show evidence of coordinated game drives where animals were herded toward cliffs or bog areas where they could be killed more easily. However, characterising Paleolithic peoples as primarily hunters oversimplifies their subsistence strategies. Plant foods, including roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, fruits, and leafy vegetation, likely provided the bulk of calories in most environments. These foods were primarily gathered by women, children, and elders, though gender divisions in Paleolithic societies remain somewhat speculative. Fishing and shellfish collection also contributed significantly to the diet in coastal and riverine areas. The daily life of Upper Paleolithic peoples revolved around securing food, creating and maintaining tools and clothing, caring for children, and moving between seasonal camps. A day might begin with checking snares and traps set the previous evening. Some group members might leave on a hunting expedition that could last hours or days. Others might gather plant foods within a few miles of camp. Someone would maintain the fire, which probably burned continuously, as creating fire from scratch was difficult and time-consuming. Hides would be scraped and processed. Tools would be sharpened or replaced. Children would play and learn by watching adults and practicing skills. Shelter varied depending on climate and available materials. In wooded areas, structures might be built from branches, covered with hides or bark. In treeless regions, mammoth bones and tusks sometimes served as structural supports for hide-covered dwellings. Caves and rock shelters offered protection where available, though truly deep caves were generally avoided for living spaces, being dark, damp, and sometimes dangerous. Most Paleolithic peoples probably spent much of their time outdoors, using shelters primarily for sleeping and during severe weather. Social interaction was crucial. Humans are intensely social creatures, and isolation from the group often meant death. Cooperation in hunting and food sharing, care of children and elders, protection from predators and rival groups, and transmission of knowledge all depended on social bonds. Language was certainly present during the Upper Paleolithic and probably much earlier. The specific languages spoken are lost forever, but they surely encompassed complex grammar, large vocabularies, and the ability to discuss abstract concepts, past events, and future plans. Conflict likely occurred between groups over territories and resources, though the low population density during the Paleolithic may have reduced competition. Archaeological evidence of violence exists but is not overwhelming. Some skeletons show signs of violent trauma, and weapons certainly could be turned against other humans. However, cooperation and trade between groups also clearly occurred, as evidenced by materials found hundreds of miles from their sources. The control of fire stands as one of humanity's most important achievements, fundamentally altering the trajectory of human evolution and culture. While modern people take fire for granted, flicking lighters or striking matches without thought, the journey from fearing fire to controlling it spanned hundreds of thousands of years and represented a cognitive and technological revolution with profound consequences. Fire exists naturally in the environment. Lightning strikes cause fires. Volcanic activity produces flames. Spontaneous combustion can occur in peat bogs and coal seams. Early hominins certainly encountered natural fires and may have learned to use them opportunistically before learning to create and maintain fire intentionally. The distinction between using fire and controlling fire is crucial. Using fire might mean taking advantage of a natural fire to cook meat or drive away predators. Controlling fire means being able to create fire at will, maintain it indefinitely, transport it when moving camp, and extinguish it when necessary. The earliest evidence for hominin use of fire comes from sites in East Africa dating back approximately 1.5 million years. However, distinguishing between natural fires and human-controlled fires in the archaeological record presents significant challenges. Burned bones and charred materials might result from natural fires, sweeping through an area where humans happen to be present. Only when fire appears in context clearly indicating human agency can we be confident of intentional use. More definitive evidence appears around 1 million years ago, with clearer indications of controlled fire emerging by 400,000 years ago. At Qesem Cave in Israel, archaeologists discovered a hearth dated to around 300,000 years ago, showing repeated use in the same location. At Terra Amata in France, a site approximately 380,000 years old contains hearths with evidence of controlled burning. By the Middle Paleolithic, roughly 250,000 years ago, hearths become common at archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia, indicating that fire control had become a standard part of human technology. Creating fire without matches or lighters requires either friction or percussion methods. The friction method involves rapidly rubbing two pieces of wood together, generating heat through friction until wood dust begins to smolder and can be blown into flame. This technique requires specific types of wood, considerable practice, and sustained physical effort. The hand drill method, where a stick is rapidly rotated between the palms while pressing down on a fireboard, can produce fire in minutes with practice but requires proper materials and skill. The bow drill, using a bow to rotate a drill on a fireboard, makes the process somewhat easier but requires manufacturing the bow apparatus. The percussion method involves striking flint or other stone against iron, pyrite, or similar minerals, producing sparks that can ignite tinder. This method is faster than friction methods once the necessary materials are available. but finding and recognizing the appropriate stones requires knowledge and experience. Early humans using percussion methods would have needed to identify suitable stones, carry them when moving between camps, and prepare proper tinder materials. Regardless of the method used to create fire, maintaining it presented another challenge. A fire that goes out means starting over, a time-consuming and difficult process. Paleolithic peoples almost certainly kept fires burning continuously whenever possible, banking them with ash at night to preserve coals that could be blown back to life the next morning. When moving camp, people likely carried embers in containers packed with slow-burning materials, allowing them to transport fire rather than creating it anew at each location. The immediate practical benefits of fire were numerous and profound. Warmth was perhaps the most obvious advantage. Fire allowed early humans to survive in cooler climates that would otherwise have been uninhabitable. As human populations expanded from tropical Africa into temperate and even subarctic regions of Europe and Asia, fire made this expansion possible. During Ice Age periods, when glaciers covered much of northern Europe and Asia, fire was essential for survival. Protection from predators provided another crucial benefit. Large carnivores like lions, leopards, hyenas, and cave bears posed serious threats to early humans. These predators naturally fear fire, rarely approaching active flames. A campfire would have created a zone of safety where humans could sleep without posting constant guards. The security provided by fire allowed better rest, reduced stress, and protected vulnerable group members like children and the elderly. Light was another advantage that transformed human life. Before fire, human activity was largely constrained to daylight hours. Darkness meant vulnerability and inactivity. Fire extended the useful day, allowing work, social interaction, and travel to continue after sunset. This extension may seem minor, but it provided several additional hours each day for activities like tool-making, hide processing, storytelling, and social bonding. The light from fires also allowed exploration of caves, opening up these spaces for shelter and ritual use. Cooking represents perhaps the most transformative impact of fire control. Raw meat is difficult to chew and digest, especially for humans with relatively small teeth and jaws. Cooking breaks down tough proteins and cellular structures, making meat more digestible and allowing the body to extract more nutrients with less digestive effort. Plant foods similarly become more digestible when cooked. Roots and tubers, which are tough and starchy when raw, become soft and more nutritious when heated. The nutritional benefits of cooking are substantial. Cooked foods provide more net calories because less energy is expended in digestion. This caloric surplus could fuel larger, more energy-intensive brains. Some anthropologists argue that cooking was a prerequisite for the development of modern human brain size. The human brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy at rest, an extraordinary proportion compared to other primates. Without the nutritional efficiency provided by cooked foods, supporting such a large brain might not have been possible. Cooking also expanded the potential human diet significantly. Many plant foods that are toxic when raw become safe to eat after cooking. Cooking kills parasites and bacteria that cause disease. It breaks down compounds that inhibit nutrient absorption. In this way, fire control through cooking increased food security and nutritional health, contributing to population growth and successful expansion into diverse environments. Beyond practical benefits, fire likely had profound social and cognitive impacts. A hearth creates a natural gathering place. Archaeological sites from the Middle and Upper Paleolithic frequently show evidence of hearths surrounded by tools, bones, and other debris, suggesting that people sat around fires while working, eating, and socializing. This shared space would have encouraged communication, cooperation, and cultural transmission. The evening hours around a fire may have been when stories were told, skills taught, and social bonds strengthened. Elders could share knowledge about hunting techniques, plant locations, dangerous animals, and distant geography. Parents could teach children tool-making and other essential skills. The group could plan future hunts or discuss moves to new camps. Some researchers speculate that the complex human capacity for language may have been enhanced by these evening gatherings, where conversation was not just possible but enjoyable and socially valuable. Fire may also have had spiritual or ritual significance. Many human cultures have regarded fire as sacred or magical, associating it with supernatural powers. While we cannot know the beliefs of Paleolithic peoples, it seems plausible that fire held special meaning beyond its practical utility. the ability to create and control such a powerful force may have elevated certain individuals to special status within their groups. The Upper Paleolithic period witnessed an explosion of artistic creation that reveals the rich inner lives and sophisticated minds of Ice Age humans. Cave paintings, carved figurines, decorated tools, personal ornaments, and other art forms appear in the archaeological record beginning around 40,000 years ago and continuing until the end of the Paleolithic. This art provides our clearest window into the minds and cultures of people who lived tens of thousands of years ago, demonstrating beyond doubt that these were fully modern humans with symbolic thinking, aesthetic sensibilities, and complex belief systems. The most famous examples of Paleolithic art are the cave paintings found primarily in Europe, though similar art exists in other regions including Australia, Asia, and Africa. These paintings, created on cave walls deep underground, depict animals, human-born figures, abstract symbols, and handprints in stunning detail and with remarkable artistry. The painters used natural pigments derived from minerals, primarily iron oxides for reds and ochres, manganese oxides for blacks and browns, and charcoal for black. These pigments were sometimes mixed with binding agents like animal fat or plant saps to help them adhere to cave walls. Lascaux Cave in southwestern France contains some of the most spectacular Paleolithic art known. Discovered in 1940, the cave system features nearly 600 painted animals and countless symbols and abstract marks. The paintings date to approximately 17,000 years ago. The main chamber, often called the Hall of Bulls, displays enormous aurochs, an extinct species of wild cattle, rendered in confident flowing lines. Horses, deer, bison, and other Ice Age animals appear throughout the Yerbis cave system, painted with careful attention to anatomy and movement. The artists of Lascaux used the natural contours of the cave walls to enhance their paintings. A protrusion might become the shoulder of a bison, or a depression might suggest the belly of a pregnant mare. This three-dimensional awareness shows sophisticated artistic thinking. The painters also understood perspective and shading, techniques that would not be rediscovered in European art until the Renaissance, over 15,000 years later. Altamira Cave in northern Spain, discovered in 1868 but not fully appreciated until decades later, contains paintings roughly 18,000 to 14,000 years old. The ceiling of the main chamber features stunning polychrome paintings of bison in various postures. The artist used it in multiple colours, applied the paintings to the natural bumps and bulges of the cave ceiling to create a sense of three-dimensionality, and achieved a level of realism that astounded researchers when the cave's authenticity was finally accepted. Chauvet Cave in southern France pushes Paleolithic art even further back in time. Discovered only in 1994, Chauvet contains paintings dated to approximately 36,000 years ago, making them among the oldest known cave paintings in Europe. The sophistication of the Chauvet art surprised researchers, as earlier assumptions suggested that art would progress from simple to complex over time. Instead, the Chauvet paintings show remarkable skill from the very beginning. They depict rhinoceros, lions, bears, mammoths, and other animals, often shown in motion or interaction. The locations of these paintings raise intriguing questions. The decorated caves were not living spaces. The paintings appear deep underground, often in chambers that require crawling through narrow passages to reach. These areas are dark, cold, and sometimes dangerous, with shafts and unstable floors. Reaching them required artificial light, probably from stone lamps burning animal fat or torches made of resinous wood. The effort required to access these spaces and create art there suggests that the paintings held special significance, possibly spiritual or ritual meaning. Several theories attempt to explain the purpose of cave paintings. Some researchers suggest they served as hunting magic, with the paintings intended to ensure success in the hunt or to symbolically control the animal spirits. The fact that many depicted animals show spears or projectiles supports this interpretation. However, the species painted often do not match the species actually hunted and eaten, which complicates this explanation. Other theories propose that the caves served as sacred spaces for initiation ceremonies, religious rituals, or shamanic practices. The difficult access and the frequent depiction of dangerous animals like lions and bears, which were not food sources, support this idea. Some abstract symbols and geometric patterns in the caves might represent visions or trance states, experienced during rituals. Another possibility is that the caves served educational purposes, as spaces where knowledge about animals and hunting was transmitted to younger generations. The careful attention to animal anatomy and behaviour in the paintings could have served as teaching tools. Some researchers suggest the paintings might have been part of storytelling traditions, visual aids for narratives passed down through generations. Handprints appear in many caves, created by placing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment around it, leaving a negative image. These handprints might represent signatures or statements of presence, declarations that a person was there. The age range of the handprints, from adult size to those of children, suggests that creating these marks was a shared activity, possibly a rite of passage or a family tradition. Paleolithic sculpture represents another major art form. Venus figurines, small carved representations of female forms, have been found across Europe from Spain to Russia. These figurines, typically 5 to 15 centimeters tall, date from roughly 35,000 to 10,000 years ago. Most are carved from stone, ivory or bone, though some were shaped from clay and fired, making them among the earliest known ceramic objects. The Venus figurines typically depict women with exaggerated sexual characteristics: large breasts, wide hips, prominent buttocks, and sometimes enlarged vulvas. Faces are usually featureless or highly simplified. Arms and legs are often minimized or absent. The most famous example, the Venus of Willendorf from Austria, dated to approximately 28,000 to 25,000 years ago, shows all these characteristics in an object small enough to fit comfortably in a hand. The meaning and purpose of Venus figurines have been extensively debated. Some researchers interpret them as fertility symbols, representations of an earth goddess or mother figure, given their emphasis on female reproductive anatomy. Others suggest they might have served as self-portraits, arguing that a woman looking down at her own body might see herself with similar proportions. Alternative theories propose they were teaching tools for reproduction and childbirth education, dolls, or simply artistic explorations of the female form. The wide geographic distribution of Venus figurines, spanning thousands of miles and several thousand years, suggests they held widespread cultural significance. Their small size and portability meant they could be easily carried when groups moved between camps. Some figurines show signs of extensive handling, suggesting they were valued objects kept and used over long periods. Beyond cave paintings and figurines, Paleolithic peoples created decorated tools, personal ornaments, and musical instruments. Bone and antler tools were often carved with decorative motifs, geometric patterns, or animal figures. These decorations served no practical purpose, existing purely as aesthetic or symbolic additions. The fact that people invested time and skill in beautifying everyday objects indicates that aesthetic concerns mattered to them. Personal ornaments like beads, pendants, and perforated animal teeth appear throughout Upper Paleolithic sites. These items were often made from shells, ivory, bone, or stone, carefully shaped and pierced for stringing into necklaces or sewing onto clothing. Some beads required many hours of work to create. The materials were sometimes sourced from hundreds of miles away, indicating trade networks or long-distance travel. Wearing such ornaments likely signaled social identity, personal achievement, or group affiliation. Musical instruments from the Paleolithic include bone flutes capable of producing multiple notes. These flutes, made from bird bones or mammoth ivory, demonstrate that Paleolithic peoples had musical traditions. Music likely played important roles in ritual, celebration, social bonding, and possibly communication. Percussion instruments probably existed as well, though they leave less evidence in the archaeological record. The presence of art, music, personal decoration, and possible ritual spaces indicates that Paleolithic humans possessed rich cultural and possibly spiritual lives. They were not simply surviving day to day, but creating meaning, beauty, and shared traditions. They had the cognitive capacity for symbolic thought, the ability to represent one thing with another, which is fundamental to language, art, and complex culture. The Mesolithic period, spanning roughly from 10,000 BC to 8,000 BCE in most regions, represents a transitional phase between the Paleolithic and Neolithic. This era coincided with the end of the last ice age and the beginning of the current geological epoch, the Holocene. The massive environmental changes that accompanied the warming climate forced human populations to adapt their technologies, subsistence strategies, and social organizations in significant ways. As glaciers retreated, sea levels rose dramatically, flooding coastal areas and reshaping coastlines. The landmass connecting Britain to continental Europe disappeared beneath the North Sea. The Indonesian archipelago separated from mainland Asia. The Bering Land Bridge connecting Asia to North America was submerged. These geographical changes affected migration patterns, isolated populations, and created new marine ecosystems. The climate became warmer and generally wetter. The cold steppe and tundra environments that characterized Ice Age Europe and Asia transformed into forests. Massive herds of large game animals that thrived in open landscapes diminished or moved northward. Some species, including mammoths and woolly rhinoceros, went extinct, likely due to a combination of climate change and human hunting pressure. The environmental changes meant that humans could no longer rely on the hunting strategies that had sustained them for tens of thousands of years. Mesolithic peoples adapted by diversifying their food sources and developing new technologies. Fishing became increasingly important. People living near rivers, lakes, and coasts developed sophisticated fishing techniques, including nets, weirs, traps, and hooks. Boats and rafts allowed exploitation of marine resources in deeper waters. Shellfish collection intensified, as evidenced by large shell middens found at coastal sites. The toolkit became more diverse and specialized. Microliths, tiny stone blades often less than 1 centimeter long, became a hallmark of Mesolithic technology. These small blades were hafted in groups onto wooden or bone handles to create composite tools like sickles, knives, and arrows. Microliths allowed more efficient use of raw materials, as a single stone core could produce dozens of microliths, whereas Paleolithic tool production was comparatively wasteful. The bow and arrow, while possibly invented earlier, became much more common during the Mesolithic. This weapon allowed hunters to kill game from greater distances with less risk, particularly important when hunting became more difficult in dense forests where large game was scarcer and more dispersed. The bow and arrow also enabled hunting of birds and smaller mammals that had been difficult to approach closely. Mesolithic peoples became more sedentary in some regions, particularly in areas with rich and reliable resources. The Natufian culture in the Levant, dating from approximately 12,500 to 9,500 BCE, shows clear signs of semi-permanent settlements. Natufian sites include stone structures, storage facilities, and cemeteries, suggesting that people were living in the same locations year-round or returning to them regularly. This increased sedentism laid the groundwork for the fully sedentary agricultural villages that would emerge in the following Neolithic period. Social organization likely became more complex during the Mesolithic. With more permanent settlements, concepts of property and territory probably became more defined. Storage facilities suggest planning for future needs rather than purely immediate consumption. Cemeteries with formal burials indicate attention to ancestors and possibly developing social hierarchies, as some burials contain more grave goods than others. Trade networks expanded during the Mesolithic. Obsidian, a volcanic glass highly prized for sharp tools, appears at sites hundreds of miles from volcanic sources. Shells from coastal areas are found far inland. These materials moved through exchange networks that connected different groups, facilitating not just material trade, but also the exchange of ideas, technologies, and probably marriage partners. The Mesolithic saw continued artistic expression, though somewhat different from Paleolithic cave art. Rock art, pecked or painted on exposed rock faces rather than in caves, became more common. Decorated objects, including carved bone and antler pieces, continued. Personal ornaments remained important, with increasing variety in both materials and styles. The transition from Paleolithic to Mesolithic occurred at different times in different places, and some regions show no clear Mesolithic phase at all. In the Middle East, where agriculture emerged early, the Mesolithic was brief. In far northern regions, Mesolithic style adaptations to environmental changes continued for thousands of years longer. In the Americas and Australia, which were less affected by glaciation, the archaeological record shows more continuity. The Neolithic period, beginning around 10,000 BCE in some regions and lasting until the introduction of metalworking, witnessed what archaeologist V. Gordon Childe termed the Neolithic Revolution. This revolution involved the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture and animal domestication, fundamentally transforming human society, economy, demography, and relationship with the environment. This shift represents one of the most important transitions in human history, with consequences that still shape our world today. The Neolithic Revolution did not happen suddenly or uniformly across the globe. Instead, agriculture emerged independently in several different regions at roughly similar times. The Fertile Crescent, stretching from the Mediterranean coast through Mesopotamia, saw the earliest development of farming beginning around 10,000 BCE. China developed independent agriculture in both the Yellow River Valley, where millet was domesticated, and the Yangtze River Valley, where rice cultivation began around 9,000 to 8,000 BCE. The Americas saw multiple independent agricultural origins, including Mesoamerica, where maize was domesticated around 9,000 years ago, and the Andes, where potatoes and quinoa were cultivated. Sub-Saharan Africa, New Guinea, and possibly other regions also developed agriculture independently. The transition to agriculture was gradual, often taking thousands of years in any given region. It did not represent a sudden flash of insight where someone decided to plant crops instead of gathering wild plants. Rather, the process involved countless small steps, experiments, and adaptations across many generations. People likely began by simply protecting and encouraging wild plants that they regularly harvested, perhaps clearing competing vegetation or watering plants during dry periods. Over time, they began deliberately planting seeds from plants with desirable characteristics, unconsciously selecting for traits like larger seeds, non-shattering seed heads that did not drop their seeds before harvest, and reduced bitterness or toxicity. The domestication of wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent provides a detailed example of this process. Wild wheat and barley grow throughout this region, and hunter-gatherers had harvested these grains for thousands of years before domestication. Wild grain heads shatter when ripe, scattering seeds to propagate the next generation. This trait ensures reproductive success for wild plants, but makes harvesting difficult, as ripe grains fall to the ground before they can be collected. However, occasional genetic mutations produce plants with non-shattering seed heads. In the wild, these mutations are disadvantageous because the seeds remain attached to the parent plant rather than dispersing. When humans began collecting wild grains, they inadvertently selected for non-shattering varieties. The grains still attached to their heads when the harvest was ready would be collected and brought back to camp. Some of these seeds would inevitably fall near the camp or be intentionally planted. Over generations, the proportion of non-shattering plants increased in harvested populations. Other changes occurred as well. Domestic wheat and barley have larger grains than their wild ancestors. They germinate more uniformly and mature more synchronously, making harvest more efficient. These changes accumulated over thousands of years of unconscious and later conscious selection. Animal domestication followed similar patterns. Dogs were the first domesticated animals, likely emerging from wolves that scavenged near human camps. The tamest, least aggressive wolves could approach humans more closely and access food scraps. Over generations, these proto-dogs became increasingly docile and physically different from wild wolves, eventually becoming true domestic dogs. This process may have begun as early as 30,000 years ago, well before the Neolithic, though the clearest evidence for domestic dogs dates to around 15,000 years ago. Sheep and goats were among the first herd animals domesticated, around 11,000 to 10,000 years ago in the Near East. These animals were relatively easy to control and provided meat, milk, and eventually wool. Cattle were domesticated from wild aurochs around 10 to 500 years ago, also in the Near East. Pigs were domesticated multiple times independently in different regions, including Siblu, China, and the Near East, around 9,000 years ago. The domestication process changed animals in predictable ways. Domestic animals tend to be smaller than their wild ancestors, have more docile temperaments, show greater variation in coat colour and pattern, and sometimes develop physical changes like floppy ears or curly tails. These changes result from selection for tameness and from the relaxed selection pressures of domestic life, where animals no longer need to evade predators or compete as intensely for resources. The advantages of agriculture were not immediately obvious, and in many ways early farmers lived harder lives than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Agriculture requires more labour than hunting and gathering. Fields must be cleared, ploughed, planted, weeded, protected from pests and harvested. Food must be processed and stored. Early agricultural yields were relatively low, and crop failures meant starvation. The diet of early farmers was less diverse than that of hunter-gatherers, leading to nutritional deficiencies. Skeletons from early agricultural populations show more signs of malnutrition, disease, and dental problems than those of hunter-gatherers. So why did people adopt agriculture despite these drawbacks? The answer likely involves population pressure and the ability of agriculture to support higher population densities, even if individual quality of life declined. Agriculture could produce more calories per unit of land than hunting and gathering, though it required more labour. This allowed populations to grow larger and live in permanent settlements. Once populations grew, returning to hunting and gathering became impossible, as the local wild resources could not support the larger population. People were, in a sense, trapped by their own success. Agriculture also allowed accumulation of surplus food, which could be stored for lean times or traded. Surplus freed some individuals from food production, allowing specialization. Potters, weavers, toolmakers, priests, and eventually administrators and rulers could be supported by farmers. This specialization led to technological advances and increasingly complex social hierarchies. The Neolithic Revolution brought profound social changes. Permanent settlements became the norm. Houses were built to last for generations. People could accumulate possessions since they did not need to carry everything when moving camp. Concepts of private property emerged more strongly, as specific families owned specific fields, houses, and livestock. Inequality increased, with some families accumulating more resources than others. Social hierarchies became more elaborate. In hunter-gatherer societies, while some individuals certainly had more prestige than others, the egalitarian nature of nomadic life and the inability to accumulate significant personal wealth kept inequalities relatively limited. In agricultural societies, wealth could accumulate across generations. Successful farmers could acquire more land. Families with more resources could better weather crop failures. Over time, class distinctions emerged between wealthy landowners, ordinary farmers, and the landless poor. Religion likely changed during the Neolithic. While Paleolithic peoples certainly had spiritual beliefs, Neolithic religion shows signs of increased organization and institutionalization. Impressive temples and shrines appear in the archaeological record. Some sites show evidence of large-scale ritual feasting. Burials become more elaborate for high-status individuals. These changes suggest the emergence of organized priesthoods and more complex mythologies. Warfare probably intensified during the Neolithic. With permanent settlements and accumulated wealth in the form of stored grain and domestic animals, raiding became more profitable. Settlements needed defense, and fortification walls appear at many Neolithic sites. The earliest clear evidence of organized violence and warfare dates to the Neolithic, with mass graves showing signs of violent death and settlements showing destruction by fear. Gender relations may have shifted during the Neolithic, though this remains debated. Some researchers argue that women had relatively high status in hunter-gatherer societies, with the products of gathering providing most calories. With agriculture, they argue, male control over land and ploughing technology reduced women's economic importance and autonomy. Others suggest that gender relations varied greatly across different societies and that generalizations are difficult. The Neolithic Revolution had profound environmental consequences. Forests were cleared to create fields. Soil erosion increased. Wild animal and plant populations declined as humans converted habitat for agriculture. Domestic animals overgrazed some areas, turning them into degraded landscapes. Human impact on the environment, while present in the Paleolithic, intensified dramatically during the Neolithic, setting patterns that continue to this day. Disease patterns changed with agriculture. Settled life with higher population densities facilitated disease transmission. Domestic animals served as sources of new diseases that could jump to humans. Many diseases that afflict humans today, including influenza, smallpox, and measles, originated in domestic animals. Poor sanitation in densely populated villages contributed to intestinal parasites and diseases. The nutritional deficiencies common in early agricultural populations weakened immune systems. As a result, early farmers often suffered more health problems than their hunter-gatherer ancestors, despite having more reliable food supplies. The Neolithic period saw the establishment of permanent settlements that grew larger and more complex than any previous human communities. These settlements ranged from small farming villages of a few dozen people to proto-urban centres housing thousands. The architecture, social organisation, and cultural sophistication of these communities laid the groundwork for the cities and civilizations that would emerge in the Bronze Age. Jericho, located in the Jordan Valley in the West Bank, ranks among the oldest continuously occupied settlements in the world. The site shows occupation dating back to around 9500 BCE, during the pre-pottery Neolithic period. At its peak during the Neolithic, Jericho housed perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants, an enormous population for its time. The early settlement at Jericho featured round houses built from mud brick. These structures had stone foundations and single rooms with domed roofs. The houses were surprisingly sophisticated, with plastered floors and walls. Some structures had built-in hearths and storage facilities. The settlement covered about 10 acres, making it substantial for its era. One of the most remarkable features of Neolithic Jericho was its fortification system. Around 8000 BCE, the inhabitants constructed a stone wall around the settlement, along with a massive stone tower that still stands over 26 feet tall. The wall was over 6 feet thick and likely stood 12 to 15 feet high originally. The tower, with an internal staircase, required moving and shaping hundreds of tons of stone, representing an enormous investment of labour. The purpose of these fortifications has been debated. They might have defended against human enemies, suggesting warfare or raiding was a concern. Alternatively, they might have served as flood control, as Jericho is near the Jordan River and would have been vulnerable to flooding. Some researchers suggest the tower had ritual or ceremonial significance rather than purely practical functions. Whatever their purpose, the fortifications demonstrate sophisticated planning, social organisation sufficient to coordinate large-scale public works, and the ability to mobilise significant labour. Jericho's economy was based on agriculture and herding. Inhabitants grew wheat and barley, cultivated legumes and raised goats. They also continued to hunt wild game and gather wild plants, supplementing their agricultural diet. The presence of trade goods from distant regions, including obsidian from Anatolia and shells from the Mediterranean and Red Sea, indicates that Jericho participated in far-reaching exchange networks. The people of Jericho practiced interesting burial customs. Many deceased were buried beneath the floors of houses, keeping ancestors close. In some cases, skulls were removed from burials, covered with plaster to recreate facial features, and then kept in houses. These plastered skulls, with shells sometimes inserted for eyes, might represent ancestor veneration or attempts to maintain connections with deceased family members. Çatalhöyük, located in south-central Turkey, represents an even larger and more complex Neolithic settlement. Occupied from approximately 7500 BCE to 500 BCE, Çatalhöyük at its peak housed perhaps 5,000 to 8,000 people, making it one of the largest settlements of the Neolithic world and arguably the world's first city. The layout of Çatalhöyük was unique and quite unlike modern cities. Houses were built directly adjacent to one another, with no streets or alleys between them. Residents entered their homes through openings in the roofs, climbing down ladders into the interior. They moved around the settlement by walking across the flat roofs, which served as public spaces and work areas. This design provided excellent security, as there were no ground-level entrances that could be breached by raiders. The houses at Çatalhöyük were remarkably uniform in size and layout, typically single-room rectangular structures around 25 to 30 square meters. Interiors were carefully organised, with platforms along the walls serving as beds, benches and work surfaces. Built-in ovens and hearths provided cooking and heating. Storage bins were incorporated into walls. Walls and platforms were plastered and often painted with elaborate murals. The artwork at Çatalhöyük provides fascinating insights into Neolithic culture. Wall paintings depicted hunting scenes with groups of humans pursuing deer, bulls, and other game. Some murals showed geometric patterns. Others displayed peculiar images that might be landscapes and maps, or symbolic representations. Reliefs modelled in plaster showed animals like leopards and bears. Female figurines, some of them quite large and depicting corpulent women, appear throughout the site, suggesting possible goddess worship or fertility symbolism. Like Jericho, Çatalhöyük residents buried their dead beneath house floors. Dozens of burials might accumulate under a house over its lifetime. Bodies were placed in flex positions and grave goods varied from none to elaborate collections of objects. Some burials included obsidian mirrors, stone weapons, bone tools, baskets, and even complete leopard skulls. The variation in burial goods suggests some degree of social differentiation, though extreme inequality does not appear to have existed. The economy of Çatalhöyük was based on agriculture and herding. Residents grew wheat, barley, and legumes and kept cattle, sheep, and goats. Hunting remained significant, particularly of wild cattle. The site's location in a fertile river valley, with access to diverse resources, supported its large population. Çatalhöyük also controlled obsidian sources in nearby volcanic regions. This valuable stone was traded extensively. bringing wealth and goods to the settlement. No obvious public buildings, temples, or elite residences have been identified at Çatalhöyük, suggesting a relatively egalitarian social structure. All houses were similar in size and layout. Evidence of craft specialization is limited, with most households producing their own tools, pottery, and textiles. However, the ability to organize and maintain such a large settlement required some degree of coordination and leadership, even if social hierarchies were not strongly developed. Other significant Neolithic settlements include Abu Huraira in Syria, which documents the transition from hunter-gathering to farming over several millennia. Mehrgarh in Pakistan shows early farming and pottery production, dating to around 7000 BCE. Skara Brae in Scotland, though later than Jericho and Çatalhöyük, provides excellent preservation of a Neolithic village from around 300 BCE, complete with stone furniture and passages connecting houses. These settlements shared certain characteristics that defined Neolithic life. Rectangular houses built from mud brick, stone, or wood became standard. Houses were often grouped tightly together, with shared walls common. Public or communal spaces appeared, whether plazas, central buildings, or defensive walls. Storage facilities, both in individual homes and communal structures, held grain and other goods. Social complexity increased in these settlements. While full-blown class systems and state-level organisation had not yet emerged, clear differences in wealth and status existed. Some individuals and families accumulated more resources. Craft specialists appeared, producing pottery, tools, or textiles. Religious specialists or priests likely existed, organising ritual activities and maintaining shrines or temples. The establishment of these permanent settlements represented a point of no return for human society. Once populations had grown in response to agricultural surplus and become dependent on farming, returning to mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyles was nearly impossible. The settlements also created new challenges. Sanitation in densely populated villages required management. Social conflicts needed resolution without individuals simply moving away. Resources like wood and water could become depleted, requiring organised management or trade. These challenges drove the development of increasingly complex social and political institutions. The Stone Age, spanning millions of years from the first crude stone tools to the sophisticated agricultural societies of the Neolithic, laid the foundation for all subsequent human history. The developments during this immense period shaped human biology, behaviour, culture and society in ways that continue to influence us today. Biologically, humans evolved during the Stone Age from early hominins into anatomically modern Homo sapiens. Brain size increased dramatically, reaching modern proportions by the late Paleolithic. Upright posture, manual dexterity, and complex vocal anatomy capable of articulate speech all emerged during this period. The physical form of modern humans is fundamentally a Stone Age adaptation, evolved for life as hunter-gatherers in varied environments. Behaviourally, the Stone Age saw the development of all fundamental human capabilities and activities. Language evolved during this period, enabling complex communication, social coordination, and cultural transmission. Tool use and manufacture became increasingly sophisticated, demonstrating enhanced cognitive abilities and forward planning. Fire control, perhaps the most important technological development before agriculture, transformed human ecology. Art, music, and symbolic thought emerged, revealing the rich inner lives and sophisticated minds of Paleolithic humans. Culturally, the Stone Age witnessed the development of diverse societies and traditions. While we cannot know the specific beliefs, stories, or languages of Stone Age peoples, the archaeological evidence makes clear that they possessed complex cultures. They buried their dead with care, suggesting beliefs about death and possibly an afterlife. They created art that might have had spiritual, educational, or purely aesthetic purposes. They developed social norms and transmitted knowledge across generations. They formed bonds of kinship and alliance that connected communities across wide regions. Socially, the Stone Age saw humans living primarily in small mobile bands of hunter-gatherers for most of the period, then transitioning to larger, more sedentary agricultural communities during the Neolithic. This transition brought profound changes in social organisation, including increased social stratification, the emergence of inequality, the development of specialised roles, and the creation of more formal political and religious institutions. Technologically, Stone Age peoples progressed from the simplest stone flakes to sophisticated composite tools, from crude hand axes to finely crafted blades, points, and needles. They learned to work bone, antler, and ivory in addition to stone. They created pottery and wove textiles. They domesticated plants and animals, fundamentally altering their relationship with the natural world and setting the stage for all subsequent agricultural societies. The transition from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age occurred gradually, and at different times in different regions. The Bronze Age began with the discovery that copper, and later copper alloyed with tin to make bronze, could be smelted from certain ores and worked into tools and weapons superior in some ways to stone. This transition began around 300 BC in the Near East, but occurred much later in many other regions, and some societies continued using stone tools into the historical period. The advent of metalworking enabled new technologies and industries. Metal tools were more durable and could be resharpened more easily than stone. Metal weapons were more effective in warfare. The mining, smelting, and working of metals required specialized knowledge and equipment, encouraging further craft specialization and trade. Societies that mastered metalworking often gained advantages over those that had not, accelerating the spread of Bronze Age technologies. Writing emerged during the Bronze Age in several regions, marking the transition from prehistory to recorded history. The earliest writing systems, including Sumerian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics, developed around 3200 BC. Writing allowed information to be recorded and transmitted with far greater precision and permanence than oral tradition alone. Legal codes, historical records, religious texts, and administrative documents became possible. Knowledge could accumulate across generations more effectively. The transition from oral to written cultures represents another profound shift in human society, though it built on cognitive and social foundations laid during the Stone Age. The legacy of the Stone Age permeates modern human life in ways both obvious and subtle. Our brains evolved primarily during this period, shaped by the demands of Stone Age life. Our social instincts, including the capacity for language, cooperation, and conflict, reflect Stone Age adaptations. Our dietary preferences, including the appeal of sweet and fatty foods that were rare and valuable in Stone Age environments, can lead to health problems in modern environments where such foods are abundant. The Stone Age established fundamental patterns of human existence. The family as a basic social unit, the importance of cooperation and reciprocity, the tendency towards social hierarchies, the use of symbolic thought and representation, the creation of art and music, the practice of religious or spiritual beliefs, and the telling of stories all have Stone Age origins. These patterns appear across virtually all human cultures, suggesting deep roots in our shared Stone Age past. Modern humans sometimes imagine Stone Age peoples as primitive or inferior, but this perception reflects misunderstanding. Stone Age peoples were fully modern humans, as intelligent and creative as anyone alive today. They simply lived in different circumstances with different technologies. They solved complex problems, adapted to diverse and often harsh environments, developed rich cultures, and passed knowledge across generations. They were our ancestors, and we carry their legacy in our genes, our minds, and our societies. The study of the Stone Age continues to evolve as new discoveries emerge. Advances in dating techniques allow more precise chronologies. DNA analysis reveals population movements and relationships between ancient peoples. Experimental archaeology, where researchers attempt to recreate ancient technologies, provides insights into how things were made and seen. Each discovery adds detail to our understanding while also raising new questions. Many questions about the Stone Age remain unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. We will never know the specific languages spoken, the exact beliefs held, or the individual stories lived by most Stone Age peoples. The vast majority of Stone Age sites have been destroyed by natural processes or remain undiscovered. Organic materials like wood, leather, and plant fibers rarely survive, leaving gaps in our knowledge of Stone Age technology and daily life. But despite these limitations, the broad outlines are clear, and the evidence grows more detailed each year. The Stone Age reminds us of human resilience, adaptability, and creativity. Over millions of years, our ancestors survived ice ages and environmental changes, spread across the globe, developed technologies from scratch, created art and culture, and built the foundations for modern civilization. They did this without writing, without metal, without any of the technologies we consider essential. They had only their intelligence, their social bonds, and the resources of the natural world. Understanding the Stone Age also provides perspective on modern challenges. Humans evolved in small groups where everyone knew everyone else, living close to nature with immediate consequences for environmental damage or resource depletion. Modern society, with its millions and billions of people, its global interconnections, its technologies that separate us from direct experience of natural limits, presents challenges our Stone Age minds are not necessarily well equipped to handle. Recognizing this mismatch can help us understand modern social and environmental problems and potentially address them more effectively. The Stone Age was not a static period of unchanging primitiveness, but a dynamic era of constant, if gradual, innovation and adaptation. It was not a unified culture, but a vast tapestry of diverse peoples living in different environments, developing distinct traditions while sharing fundamental human characteristics. It was not merely a prelude to civilization, but a valid and successful way of life that sustained humanity for the overwhelming majority of our existence as a species. As we look back across the vast expanse of the Stone Age, we see the origins of everything that makes us human: the capacity for language and symbolic thought, the drive to create art and music, the ability to cooperate in large groups, the use of technology to shape the environment, and the establishment of cultural traditions that persist across generations all emerged during this period. The Stone Age was not simply the beginning of human history, but the foundation upon which all subsequent history was built. The men, women, and children of the Stone Age were our ancestors in the most direct sense. Their struggles and successes, their innovations and adaptations, their cultures and societies, their art and technologies created the world in which we live. Every modern human carries genes that passed through thousands of Stone Age generations. The cognitive abilities we use to read these words, the social instincts that guide our interactions, the aesthetic preferences that influence our judgments, the emotional responses that shape our experiences all reflect our Stone Age heritage. In studying the Stone Age, we study ourselves. We see where we came from, how we became what we are, and perhaps gain insights into what we might become. The Stone Age reminds us that human nature is both ancient and adaptable, that we carry within us the legacy of millions of years of evolution and tens of thousands of years of cultural development. It shows us that humans have always been creative, resourceful, and capable of extraordinary achievements, even with the simplest tools and most basic technologies. The transition from Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age to the modern industrial and digital ages represents an acceleration of technological change. But beneath the changing technologies, fundamental human nature remains recognizable. People still form families and communities. We still create art and tell stories. We still wonder about the nature of existence and our place in the universe. We still cooperate and compete, love and hate, build and destroy. The Stone Age established these patterns, and they persist into the present. As we face the challenges of the modern world, from climate change to technological disruption to social conflicts, we can find perspective and perhaps wisdom in the Stone Age experience. For millions of years, humans survived and even thrived while adapting to changing environments, developing new technologies, and organizing increasingly complex societies. The resilience, creativity, and adaptability that carried our ancestors through the Stone Age remains within us, available to meet whatever challenges the future holds. The Stone Age represents the deep past of humanity, a period so vast and remote that it challenges imagination. Yet it is also intimately connected to the present, as every aspect of modern human existence builds on foundations laid during those ancient times. By understanding the Stone Age, we understand ourselves better, recognizing the ancient roots of the modern behaviors, appreciating the long journey that brought humanity to its current state, and perhaps gaining the wisdom to guide our future with greater insight and care. In the end, the Stone Age was not merely a prologue to history, but the longest and in many ways most important chapter of the human story. It was the time when we became human in the fullest sense, developing the physical, mental, and cultural characteristics that define our species. Everything that came after, from the first cities to the first writing, from the first empires to the first industries, from the first books to the first computers, builds on that Stone Age foundation.